Hey everybody, and welcome to STE 201, Layman Substance Iray in Depth. So a lot of you are probably wondering about Iray. There's a couple weird bugs about Iray, which is the kind of default render in Substance Painter, and I want to kind of go through those. So what I'm going to do over here in Substance Painter is I'm going to go ahead and do a, let's see here, let's find a sample. So you're going to go create or open sample, and we're going to go choose our meat mat, which is the little guy that is the little mascot for Substance Painter. And here we have the model itself. So let's go over some basic defaults right here. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and take this character's head. You can see we have three different texture sets. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that this is, I'm going to delete this and quickly create a fill layer. And I will make that color to, actually put all these in. I'll just make the color like red. Okay, so let's jump right into Iray. Iray is located here as this little camera, so I'm going to go ahead and switch that on. And here we are inside of Iray. So what is the different options inside of Iray? Well, some of these are probably self-explanatory. The min samples, okay, will be your minimum samples. Max samples are your max samples. The max time is right here in 10 seconds. So in other words, if the minute you hit this and click it on, right, if I just move this, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and whatever. It basically stops rendering at that point. So I'm going to take the max time and increase that. And you'll see it starts to really, it keeps rendering it, and eventually you get to a point where you no longer have that kind of granularity. So even if you do have max samples up above 1,000, it sort of stops the sampling process 10 seconds in. So in other words, you could be rendering for heavy max samples, but it might only go halfway because it didn't have enough time to render. So I like to put my max sample somewhere around 19 seconds is good. And the max samples I have here are pretty solid for render. You do have caustic sample enabled, which we're going to talk about a little later. And then Firefly filter enabled. I like the name of this because fireflies are those little tiny dots and so forth. So it's sort of a kind of an anti-aliasing reality here. So you can do override the viewport resolution, by the way. Currently it's at 1920 by 1200 by default. So you can go ahead and click on this and you can change the resolution. So if you want a quicker resolution, say of like maybe 700 by 400, you can go ahead and do that. And that'll render probably a little bit quicker and a little bit faster response too, as you can see here. So looking pretty good. You can also share your work, as you can see here, and this will load you into ArtStation. You can log in as well and share your work really quick. Save your renders. Obviously, we can save this as a JPEG. I don't think there's any other. Oh yeah, there's all types of formats here. And there we go. And let's keep going here. Your viewer settings, environment map. Currently, we have this panorama set up. I can choose all types of HDRI. I find that the soft one front, which is like a studio lighting, is really great for establishing your use of, like, say, subsurface scattering and so forth. And again, you can hold down your shift and right mouse button, drag your mouse left and right, and you can see we can change the light in the scene. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of these in here, and usually I like to use a neutral grade color in here. Let me go ahead and go back to this color here. So here we have this ground. You'll notice we do have a ground here for our character. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Environment exposure, you can go ahead and bring the exposure up and down, which is kind of nice. Environment rotation is the same thing as holding shift and right mouse button and dragging. You can see that lighting situations happens here, which is pretty nice. And then, of course, under the dome, let's open that up. You have the sphere with ground, or you have the sphere, or you have a infinite sphere. Now, usually you can use infinite sphere, and then sphere with ground, and then sphere. So if you do sphere with ground, you do have a radius here, and you can change the radius of the actual ground. So let me go ahead and just kind of look over here and just see what's happening. And the radius is basically being squeezed down, so you can change. It's basically changing the background and the UV layout onto a sphere. The actual texture scale can see the scale is increasing. Look at the actual ground itself. You can see the ground textures scaling or decreasing. So if you want it to get, a little bit closer, if you want, so forth. Obviously, if the character is about the size of a human being or maybe a small child, you probably would have that kind of set up and kind of help get the proper reflections if this thing is very chromy or reflective. Clearcoat is really cool. Turn that on, you get this kind of nice, just grayscale void environment. And I'll talk about how with this clear scale on, if I scrub back up here again, actually I'm not scrubbing anywhere. I'm going to come over here to this caustic sample and I'm going to turn that on. And if you take a look, you're going to start to see caustics building up, and if you can't see it too well, but you can see as I kind of move them down, you see red little pixels there. There is a sort of a color bleeding effect going on there, so that's something that's kind of cool. Go ahead and turn that off. And of course the fireflies, turning that off, you're going to get a noisier image, but a faster render. Okay, so let's go back here. We talked about the clear coat. I'll turn that back off. And here's the ground. You can turn the ground off and on. Now what does that mean? Well, it's basically interpolating a shadow pass with the ground touching the ground here. So you can see if I click this on and off, it disappears. The environment doesn't change. But you can also take the ground and put the translation to the Y, so it's coming down or lower if you want a little bit nice little kind of a shadow in there. And of course, when you turn on clear coat, you get rid of the image. So if you want to have this slightly float in the air, you can. Again, this is all about rendering in Iray, as opposed to sending it off to, Maya to render or bringing it into a Unreal Engine or Unity. So you can, again, do that. Go ahead and turn ground back on and put it probably about, let's put this to, well, 0's not going to do us any good since it's the origin, but probably right there is fine. Reflectivity. Okay, so you do have reflectivity here. And in this case, we can bring this up really high, and now you have a ground that is nice and reflective. And then you have glossiness. How glossy is that ground reflection? So I can go ahead and take that. Now you can see that we have a mirror-like material. Obviously, that wouldn't be good for someone's reel. So you can take that glossiness and maybe scale it back, give it a nice look. And of course, you can change the actual color of the clear coat to go to something like black, right? Red, whatever you want, a warm tone. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the clear coat, go back. Again, you can still see the reflection going on there. And with that said, let's go ahead and turn off reflection. I don't think I want to kind of take a look at that for now. Just leave it be. Again, visible from below. What would have to do with obviously what's under the shader itself. Again, you can use PBR Metal Rough, or if you're going into opacity, we're going to talk about that in a minute here. MDL parameter. Okay, let's go in here. So we have emissive. If we have any emissive intensity, let's go ahead and pop out of Iray so I can just show you that really quick. So if we have, say, let's jump over to the body, right? And we will add in a pass. Let's actually add in a fill layer. And we're going to go ahead and add an emissive pass. Under channels, I'm going to click on this and choose emissive. And now that we have the ability to paint emissive, I'm only going to paint emissive on here. And I'll change it to a color that's like yellow, so it glows a little bit. And then of course I can add a mask to this, add a black mask, and I can come in here and paint on this mask. So we can get like a V shape on them or whatever. So now we're going to go back into, now we have some emissive material to look at. Let's jump over here to Iray. There we go. And now back in our Iray settings here, scroll down. And again, here we have emissive. So I can go ahead and start taking the intensity up and so forth. Now this kind of works in tandem with with the exposure. So if the emissive is high, no matter what's going on with the exposure, you can see that the emissive is what it is. Right? It's kind of like self-glowing. It doesn't really take into the effect any shading information. So I can kind of bring this down roughly for now. So I can go back to the emissive, bring up the intensity. It's not creating an overall glow though. You notice it stays within its parameters. It is increasing as far as its distance of reflectivity here. Again, this is all stuff that you're kind of customizing here. You also have anisotropic levels. Anisotropic, I can never say it right. And if you take a look at the reflections in here, they change as far as being perfectly square to slightly rectangle. And you have the angle. You can change that up a little bit. Next, you have refraction. Now, here's the interesting part about refraction. Refraction is something that if you turn it on, you'll notice that everything becomes refractive in here. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about how you might want to have this on a per material basis. So if you have anything in your scene that is going to have glass in it or a refractive content like something slightly transparent, it is advisable that you put that on a separate texture set. So in other words, when you're exporting your geometry out of Maya or Max, that you assign maybe a Lambert, say in this case, you know, for the head, and then another Lambert for the bottom part of the body, because what I'm going to show you in a minute here is how you're going to do on a per setup for each piece. Because I hate to tell you this, but refraction and opacity are not good friends. So if you have the opacity channel turned on or a channel in there, it will not work. So you can see right now we have refraction, right? I'm going to go ahead and jump out of Ivory real quick. I'm going to do something bad. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to go ahead. Let's take my head for instance. I'll go to the head here. But this is actually no matter what I do here, this is affecting all channels, by the way. So I'll take the channels and I'll go ahead and add an opacity in here. And just the existence of an opacity, if I jump back into Iray real quick, you can see that it's not really working. Let's see if I'll go back to the, jump over here to the reality. Okay, so we have the emissive intensity refraction. So if I take this back, it doesn't, well, actually it is working. It's a bit odd. But you're going to get some weird results. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this out. And now if I get rid of opacity on here, it might be if I actually create a layer. So if I create, let's see, I'll add a fill layer here. And I will paint with opacity. And I will leave it like halfway or something. So now if I go ahead and render it, you could see we're not getting any refraction, right? There's no bending of the index of refraction. So if you do have painted opacity in the texture set, it kind of nullifies the refraction. You can either have one or the other, unfortunately, which is annoying. So just be aware of that. So I bet if I get rid of this layer here, and I'll just go ahead and get rid of this opacity as well, and take a look at it really quick. We should be back in business. There we go. So in this case, you see maybe I only want this head, which is on a separate texture set, to have this, but these to be okay and not be changed. So what you can do with that is come back here. And first off, I'm going to jump back into Iray real quick. Let's go ahead and change this. All right. And with Iray selected, I will come over here to refraction. And I'll bring that down. So we're back to where we were. So I'm going to go ahead and pop out now. Now, if you go ahead and take a look at your texture sets down here, this was a new feature added to a new version of Substance, and that's this little main shader, main shader, main shader. Now I'm going to take the head and click on that. I'm going to say New Shader Instance. So currently it's called Main Shader Instance. See that? And so if you take a look up here, you will see, let's go ahead and take a look. I'll pull this over here a little bit. With this head selected, I can go to the viewer setting, and you can see the instance name is called Main Shader Copy, which is red here. But what I can do is come in here and just type something like, I don't know, refraction. You know, there we go. So with that set up, as you can see here, now I can go back in to, let's jump into Iray real quick. And here we are. And if you take a look here, you know, if we currently have our display settings, and let's kind of scrub back up here. See if we're, okay, so the current shader is PBR Metal Rough. It's the instance name Refraction we're fiddling with now, so keep that in mind. So now if I come over here to my, let's come back up here, right? This can be very confusing sometimes. Let's go to Refraction. So if I take Refraction, start to pull that up, you can see now this is left alone, and this is refractive. So it's very important to create the, you know, kind of break out those instances. So whatever actual texture set you have currently selected, when you go into Iray, that's the one you're altering, okay? So for instance, if I pop out here, okay, I go to the body, right? Currently on the body reality, which is basically both of these. And you can see it's just the main shader. So anything I change here will affect this one as well. So now if I come in here and hit the rendering Iray, and I play with the refraction on this instance, right? So let's come down here and play with the refraction. You see it's only affecting the bottom half. A bit confusing, right? So in this case, I'm just dealing with the top of the head. So I'm going to go to the head itself, jump back into Iray, and now we're going to go ahead and continue on with the work we're doing here. Okay, so index of refraction, 1.5 is glass. Value of 1 is perfectly clear, so you can see there's no refraction or no bending of the background image refracted through the glass itself. You can go online and look up different indexes of refractions to get different effects like milk and jade. There's all types of craziness that you can do. In this case, I'll just leave this to a 1.5. And you also have scattering here within the refraction. So you can see light sort of scattering within the center core there. And then you have absorption. So absorption will absorb the light, hence it'll be a little bit darker. And again, depending on how much refraction you have, it's going to give you an interesting effect. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off refraction. And you also have absorption color too. So when you do have refraction going and you want to have an absorption color, let's try something crazy like green. It'll start to absorb like a greenish hue in the little kind of the corners. So I'm going to get like a different color there. So increase that absorption. You can see a little bit of discoloration there. So again, I'll turn off refraction. And that pretty much sums up all of these features that you can see here under the viewer settings. And under display settings, here's where things get interesting. So your field of view, obviously, and this doesn't deal with actual millimeter lens, but actual angle. So if you want to get, say, 65 degrees of angle, you can get that. Now you have this kind of wide angle look, which always looks a little bit too clowny. When someone wants to judge your work, you probably want to bring this down to 50 or below. So you get a nice flat image here with a lower field of view. And then you have focus distance and aperture. So this works in tandem with depth of field. So here, if I click on depth of field, come back, got to activate my post effect, sorry. And then you go depth of field. Now you're operating in depth of field, and as you increase your aperture, things go out of focus. So I'll kind of angle this up so I just have the head in focus. I'm going to take my focus distance to rack focus to the head. So I'm going to go ahead and get about right there. So now everything's out of focus there. And then if I want, I can go ahead and focus the body instead, not the head. The more aperture I have, the larger the aperture opens up, and photographically that means you have a more shallow depth of field. So this can get pretty insane, and you can have a very narrow field of view, as you can see here. It almost looks like if you're trying to do a render of an ant to make it look like it's microscopic, this would be a good idea, but most of the time you're going to have your aperture with maybe just a hair of, blurry, out of focus areas, and that'll make a nice effect. So for instance, if I want to just concentrate on the actor's head here, I want his face in focus, but the background out of focus, and go ahead and do something like that. Okay. Okay, so let's look at the other things here. Come down here, we have AntiAliasing. There is no options for this. It just kind of cleans up the aliasing. Color correction, go ahead and turn that on. We have saturation. We have contrast. Right? You have brightness, as you can see. And what else we have? We got bias. And we have sepia tone, in case you want to do like old school looking stuff. Kind of a cheesy little thing there. White balance, you can set the temperature. If you want this to look like it has been taken with a bad photographer, you can do that, I guess. You could also hit restore defaults, which will be a nice little added feature in case you get kind of lost in the midst of all this madness. All right, so I'll turn off that. Next feature up is we've done depth of field. I'll turn that off for now. And let's see what else we got here. And tone mapping, exposure, gamma, and so forth. So we can go ahead and again just do some quick post work on here. I'll turn it on and show you what I mean. Play with the gamma, and you got your mapping factor. And again, it's kind of like the fall off linear logarithmic. You also have glare. This is a kind of a cool effect because it creates this reality of kind of a, in this case you can see it's like 4-star glint or glow. And you can kind of play with that, the luminance information, and it's interesting shape. It's kind of creating a 4-pointed star. Threshold, if you want the bleeding color to come out, and then the remap factor is really nice to kind of calm down that thing. And you also got the different types of shapes. You got a lens flare. So if I go ahead and just bring up that threshold again so we can see the madness. And bring up okay, so we got lens flare, standard, we got cheap lens, filter cross screen, sunny cross. So it's just a matter of how many different stars, after image. And yeah, there's also bloom. Bloom is nice because it's only left and right. I kind of like that more than the 4-star thing, because it has an anamorphic lens flare, basically. You also can add a vignette, which is kind of cool. I like always adding a vignette. By the way, I'm going to go ahead and turn off some features here. I think I'm going to go to my aperture and bring that back down again. There we go. And then here we have the vignette. The vignette's really cool. I like to use that a lot because it concentrates, it puts a black vignette around the edge, which is basically light leakage photographically. Again, you're kind of replicating the flawed world of the real world. There is no problems of light leakage taking photographs in CG land because we're not using a physical lens, which usually loses lights around the edges. And then you have this annoying lens distortion, which I find to be kind of stupid. Because yes, you can add lens distortion, but it gives you this kind of movie frame here, which although you can kind of soften up the edges a little bit, smooth the edges out, it just looks kind of cheesy, like you're looking through some slideshow or something. It'd be nice if we could zoom in a little bit on the object here. Obviously, you can crop that in post if you prefer. But yeah, I'm not a fan of the of this kind of tool set anyway. And you also have active color profiles. These are cool, so you can actually come in here, choose your, set the white point here, and then you have your, you can come here and dab it if you wish. And you also have different profiles. So we're currently looking at this at sRGB, but you can also come in here and play with anything. So by default, if I turn this off, I believe we're looking at through sRGB, if I'm not mistaken. But there's all types of different profiles here that you can actually use and bring in your own. Rec 709, which is nice. And you can kind of see the difference between the two. You can hit Restore Defaults or just deactivate it. Okay. So that should be pretty much it. Like I said, depending on what you're on, in this case it's the refraction, the shader change you do is specifically for this for this scene setup by itself. So you can come in here and set this to the opacity, blending opacity, I think it is. But again, if you want refraction, you have to make sure there's no opacity. And if you want opacity, it'll be there, but your options for showing refraction in the render inside of Substance Painter are very limited. So kind of keep that in mind throughout this. And that's pretty much it. So if you have any questions, you can email me. Check out my website, VFXforFilmmakers.com. VFX for Filmmakers proudly releases Scratch to Substance Volume 1. Whether you're an environment modeler creating assets for a game engine or a visual effects specialist looking to create pre-rendered photorealistic worlds, this package is for you. In this training video, we start with modeling in Maya via photographic perspective. After proper care is taken for UV layout, the models are brought into Substance Painter for materials and texturing, then exported to both Arnold in Maya and Unreal 4. Throughout this 10-hour course, we cover photographic modeling techniques, seamless UV strategies, building out a high-res mesh for baking, ID mask creation in Maya, map baking techniques in Substance Painter, fill layers versus layers, creating custom smart materials generators, building Substance Designer templates, creating materials in Designer, stencils, decals, material stencil projections, grunge maps, procedurals, filters, dirt cracks, weathering, projection texturing, Unreal Engine level setup and diagnostics, scale setup in virtual reality, rebaking normal maps, and rendering in Arnold for Maya. VFXforFilmmakers.com, the next evolutionary step for storytellers.